I think 20 years ago, 30 years ago, uh, autism was a more narrow band spectrum. And now it's just such a wide spectrum of neurodivergence, really big. And you have people self assessing, you have people who are assessed by professionals, but it almost, and please don't get me wrong on saying this, but it's almost in some areas gotten to the point where people want self diagnose and say they are autistic, thinking that they're going to get some other sympathy. I've seen that through a couple of social media posts and people, and then others saying, "You're no such thing. I am because this is why, and you're
Mhm.
not because of that." Those things, but I don't want that to cloud people's mind to really understand that it is a wide spectrum.
There used to be a separate diagnosis for Asperger's. And so that is the term is high functioning. A lot of people don't like that term, but that's really more for someone who might be able to go to college and hold a job, but have difficulty navigating social situations. They might be able to dress themselves and things like that. And so that diagnosis, Asperger's, is no longer there. So that's why it feels like everything is just getting lumped into autism because technically it is. And you have these different levels. So you have level 1, level 2, and level 3 of autism. So that you get the diagnosis, but then the levels. And the level is really what connotates how much daily support someone needs. So sometimes someone needs 20 care because they can't dress themselves or feed themselves, bathe themselves, things like that. And that's a very different autism experience than someone who's off in college and has different daily support needs.
Before we really jump into your stuff and the navigating autism, because we're talking about you just mentioned the word high functioning, and a lot of people they don't like that term now, or some don't.
Yeah, some don't.
Why? Why? I gotta ask this. I've met some. I've met five billionaires, people that we know, and then
Okay.
you have current billionaires. Musk. Now I can't even think, but I don't want to pull out a whole bunch of names. But you see a lot of these people who are very, very bright, who have a hard time functioning socially. And
Hmm.
you would look at them and people would do a self-diagnosis or a diagnosis of them because of the way they're speaking or their lack of communication or their brains are going all over the place. Why
Hmm.
is that with these extremely smart, brilliant people or seemingly bright people? Do you have an
Why
answer
is
for
it
us?
that many of them have autism?
Right, or seemingly, because again, you hear them and you watch them, and you go, "Oh, they must be autistic," or something like that, because they're just
It
so all
could.
over the map sometimes.
Right. So, I mean, self-diagnosis is not a good place to start. Or even diagnosis of, oh, that person is this way, so they must have X, right? Right now, we're talking about autism. That definitely gets to be hurtful for sure, and can take away from different things, right? So autism in many ways has, in some part, become more of an identity for some people than a diagnosis, right? So they might be thinking, okay, I'm quirky and I'm this and I'm that, so therefore I am autistic, right? And so autism is a very unique place in that some people take that diagnosis and wrap it up into their identity. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen a lot with other diagnoses, right? So, like, oncology or something like that, right? Like, you don't just say, I am brain cancer, right? Like, you don't take that on. But with autism, like you were asking in the beginning, when people are, making a self-diagnosis, they're taking it on as an identity. And some people with autism think that's okay, and some people with autism don't, right? It really depends on that person's experience, but it's a very unique area in the sense that people are taking it on more as almost character definition, which will upset other parents and other people with autism especially when daily living is so challenging, right? Sometimes there might not be speech at all for somebody. And so they don't even get to say, hey, like, that's not my autism experience, and I don't want to define myself as being autistic like that, because that's not what I want. Someone who has self-injurious behavior, maybe they're banging their head into the wall or biting themselves. That's certainly not their perspective. And this is where you get the tension, right? So there's a lot of tension in the autism community because it is so varied. And so you have some people speaking up and trying to define what autism is, but it's not like that for everyone. And then that's where the controversy happens, and there's a lot of infighting, which is really not helpful for anyone. So I think sometimes people apply that autism label when they're meaning something as a character. A lot of times nowadays it's a beneficial characteristic, right? Because we associate autism with intense focus. And, you know, these billionaires or successful people, what do you have to be successful? You have to have that intense focus, right? Ask any Navy SEAL, right? It's focus, right? And then the discipline, ask any successful sports person, right? Is the dedication, the determination. So they're applying this really beneficial description, but they're using the word autism. And a medical professional is really the only one who should be able to say whether someone has autism or not.
I love how you said that and explained it, because again, I do know, and I have seen people I even know, who, and you said they want to identify. And that's exactly what my feeling was. They want to put themselves in a group. They want to identify to either stand out, or they did the self-diagnosis and they don't know where to put themselves because they are quirky, and they just don't want, maybe they don't want somebody else to say something about them. So they want to put that stamp on themselves first and identify. So
Right. Yeah, and that's the part to just be cautious of, because you don't want an autism diagnosis that is really life impacting for those with the diagnosis to become a characteristic, right? So the question I get often is, you know, so 37% of kids with autism lose their diagnosis. That's the latest research. So an autism diagnosis is not lifelong. I mean, that's the other thing to add to this conversation. So sometimes people say, well, if the child loses their autism diagnosis, they're losing those like special skills. And that's not true, right? Autism is many times people call it like autism is this superpower. There are certain aspects that become amazing about that person, but I wouldn't just like negate that entire person and just say, oh, you're special only because you have autism, right?
mhm.
I see many kids who resolve the different health issues that hold them back, and they become even more amazing. So it's just really important to know all the different scientific information about autism, especially that the diagnosis is not lifelong for everyone, and that the specialness of a person doesn't come from their diagnosis necessarily.
Again, so well put.
Thank you.
And for those of you who are just jumping on and listening and watching, this is Theresa Lyons, and you can find her website at Navigating Autism. And I do the autism because it's spelled AWETISM.com. So don't forget that, folks. So Theresa, you base a lot of your stuff on science and real world experience, and you have worked with parents from over 21 different countries. You have
Yeah.
this phenomenal education. Can you give us a little bit about how, why, and what got you here?
Sure. 2 words. I can sum it all up in 2 words. Why am I doing this? My daughter. So this was not a plan of mine or anything like that. So to take you back, my daughter was diagnosed with autism in 2013, and I have a PhD in computational chemistry from Yale. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry in R&D. I also worked in the pharmaceutical industry in understanding how far the business is actually built, and how do you increase revenue from a drug. So I was really involved in all different aspects of the healthcare industry. And then when my daughter was diagnosed, I asked the doctor, okay, now what do we do? And the answer was like, well, There's not really much to do. Things typically get worse over life. They don't get better. And that's it. Right. And I'm just like, what? That, like, there's no way as a consultant, I was a medical strategist. There was no way I could have told any of the pharma clients that we had, like, you want to get into that therapeutic area? Yeah, there's nothing to do. Like, that is not an answer at all. So I stopped work and I had the skills of, okay, how do I build a good healthcare team? How do I find out who's at the cutting edge of the research? Why does that even matter? So it takes 30 years for research to become mainstream practice. And I knew that, right? So it's like, I'm not going to wait 30 years. My daughter was diagnosed at 3.5. I'm not waiting until she's, midlife, 33, 34, before I actually start doing meaningful things. No, like I can get a jump on that. Using my background and having a PhD in chemistry, came in handy. And so I just started studying the research, the literature. And that's when I first learned, back then it was 10% of kids with an autism diagnosis lost their diagnosis. And I spoke to the researchers and I'm like, what is that? Can you talk to me? What does it look like? Then I started talking to other parents who had done this and, understanding their experience, what it took, the issues that they were overcoming. And it's legit, right? So it's like, all right, my daughter could have like 2 totally different lives based upon what kind of information I'm using. So I stopped work and focused on quality information. And she has a completely different life now that she never would even remotely have if I focused on old data.
What's amazing is, like you said, back in 2013 when your daughter was diagnosed, that's not too far back. And there's 10% of the kids at that point in time that would,
Yeah.
and I don't want to say this word of saying get over or fix themselves or cure, but they were able to lose the diagnosis of
Lose
autism,
the
and now
diagnosis. Yeah. So
it's
it was back then.
37%.
Yes, 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 yes. You are. Yep. It's important to understand that. So back then, it was called an optimal outcome, right? It was 10%. And the scientists, this is how they referred to it as, they didn't say it was like a cure or anything like that because the kids are still kids, right? They were diagnosed when they were 2 or 3, and then when they're 7, right? No more autism. So you can't say like, I don't know, something was cured, right? But they didn't need speech therapy anymore. They were functioning in school without additional supports. They're able to play sports if they want, or music, or, like they can choose and create their own life, right? So that's why that phrase optimal outcome was termed. And I talked to the scientist about it and really wanted to understand what that was. But now that the study shows, and the study showing 30, I was up in Boston Children's Hospital. So I want people to understand this is quality research. These are legitimate hospitals, right? This is not some like no name somewhere that nobody's ever heard of. These are quality studies. And now what the scientists are saying that there's something called non-persistent autism and then still autism. So it's getting a separate classification. And then to take that even one step further, right? When people are diagnosed with autism later in life, so that's happening more and more, the genetics are actually very different from someone who is diagnosed with autism when they're younger. And so they're just starting to flesh that out and really understand, hey, what's going on there? So there's so much about the field of autism that is changing. That it's important to stay on top of it. But yeah, 10% to 37%, it's important to know what those scientists are doing, because look at the numbers that change.
It's so, since such a short period of time and a great increase as far as that goes with the 10 to 37%. Is it because, and forgive me for being not smart about this, but is it because we are encompassing more of the spectrum to say autism, and then those who are truly outside of that spectrum of, forgive me, of real autism are
I
all of a
got you.
sudden,
Yep.
I'm able to speak. I feel confident. Therefore, I am no longer.
Yeah. So the question is, okay, are people coming off the spectrum because A, they were never really on the spectrum to begin with, or B, because they're on like the border of it, right? Maybe they're on the higher functioning side, that it's easier for them to go to the other side. Though that I couldn't answer definitively with like facts. I can say that the doctors up at Boston Children's Hospital, they're pretty good at making autism diagnosis. So I mean, I would hope that like A wasn't the case where someone was diagnosed with autism and they really didn't have it to begin with. I don't think that's the accounting for that large number from 10% to 37%. In part, I think that number is increasing because parents are more aware of that as a possibility. So that is the benefits of social media, right? Information gets disseminated really quickly. And that's, I mean, that's the whole reason why I started a YouTube channel over a decade ago, was to take this science that was just sitting in PubMed that really nobody's going to. And what I did was I would take one article and I would make a video on it. I would explain to parents the science. I would explain as to who this would be relevant to, right? Because autism looks so different. You just can't do everything for autism, and really help get that quality information out there. And there are other doctors who have been working, and with social media, parents start posting like, oh, look at my child now, and they would do before and after videos. So I feel like parents are more aware of what is possible, and then they start asking those questions of, okay, you know, what can I do? How much does diet actually impact? You know, what kind of doctor should I be working for? They start to get interested in functional medicine, which looks at root cause. So functional medicine, integrative medicine is really looking at like, what is the root cause for constipation or anxiety, right? Looking at gut infections and things like that. So I think people are getting more educated in health, and getting that information is easier. Now, the caveat comes with you get a ton of information, right? You get overwhelmed. It's hard to pick out what is relevant for my child, right? You can't just do everything that everybody is doing, again, because you have that large spectrum. And so I think that is really where parents can get tripped up, is not knowing what they should focus on. But I do know from talking to parents that parents are still getting told the same thing that I was told over 13 years ago, saying, oh, there's really nothing you can do. So we definitely need to get out there even more and more and explain the science.
And that's part of where you really come in, is to help parents get clarity and support for them to understand and have the confidence really to, here again, I'm going to use this word, and these topics have to be really careful. It's like, I don't want to upset my guests, or I don't want to upset people out there, but you want to be able to give parents this clarity and just give them guidance and focus to understand their child, and even people who do not have children, but who may have friends who have kids or whatever it might be, to have this clarity of knowing what this is and how to either help them, or how to, I'm going to say, how to behave around an autistic child.
Okay, yeah,
Because,
good.
you know, we raise our
Understanding.
voice, we scream, even if it's not at the child, but somebody else. There's a lot of noise. We mentioned about noise earlier, but there's a lot of noise, and you can upset them, right? It's not focused at that child, but they are in
Yeah.
your environment. So we have to watch what we do.
The nervous system is a beautiful thing.
Hey.
Right. So for some kids with autism, and I'm not going to say all, but for some kids with autism, their nervous system is overwhelmed, and at different times, right? So an autism meltdown is a lot of times when a child has just gone into the red zone, where they became so overwhelmed either with noise sensitivity or light or pressure on them, or they didn't sleep, and you know, other things have combined. So when the nervous system just gets overwhelmed, then yeah, an autism meltdown can happen. And an autism meltdown is so completely different than a tantrum. Like we think of a tantrum in a kid and they're throwing a fit because, they want their iPad, right? Or they want McDonald's, they want something. And then you're like, okay, fine. I'll just give it to you. Please stop, right? And they stop. That's a tantrum. That is not an autism meltdown when someone's nervous system is completely overwhelmed. And let's say you give that example of you're not yelling at the child, but they're in the room and an adult starts talking loud. That loud noise can trigger their nervous system into that overwhelmed state. Right. So having an understanding of that, let's say you're a friend and your friend's child has autism. When you go over to their house, yeah, you want to be able to interact with that child, but also not cause that child any stress. So it's really important for kids with autism to feel included, but also you don't want to do anything that's too overwhelming. So it is a balance.
I'll throw this in there for folks out there who are not quite understanding what we're talking about as far as the noise and tantrums. Think of it this way. If you're a Star Trek fan or if you're a comic book fan, you've got the betazoids who can read minds and they can get overwhelmed with a lot of information coming in their heads. You got the daredevil who's blind, but he has these other senses, which he picks up a lot of noise and feelings from his surroundings, and it confuses them, and it's a lot of noise. So I think that's probably might be the same situation. And, in those characters, they have to focus in on that one sound, the one area, and learn how to calm the noise, the other stuff. Is that a good way of putting it?
That is a very interesting analogy because you touched on something that is hugely controversial in the autism community, and that is telepathy. I don't know have you heard of the
No,
telepathy controversy in autism?
I have not.
Okay, so um
They're aliens.
so this is controversy, right? So I have to say I have not found a research article that really can either dispute it or confirm it either way. I'll keep looking for sure. But so there are some kids with autism who have really difficulty speaking. And it might be just in that example that you gave where like when one sense isn't working, when one ability is not, then you become stronger in another area. And so there is something called the telepathy tapes. What it is there are these different experiments of a person with autism who can read other people's minds. And I wouldn't say it's really reading their mind. I mean, if you think about our brain, right? Our brain is electric, right? Many people don't think about our neurons and the action potential and everything's getting fired. Like, yes, our neurotransmitters are chemical in basis, but it's electricity for the most part in our brain. So like you and I are on Wi-Fi right now. So, right? So it's just like a different kind of Wi-Fi, but so there is controversy over some kids with autism who can basically like hear somebody else's thoughts and they're able to, almost in a sense communicate that, and they kind of test it, but it's I don't want people to think that that is what autism is. It's a unique aspect that is evolving, I would say.
I can understand where that would be controversial, but also could be possibly factual. I'm thinking of it as like a dog. The dog senses what the person is going through. They can't communicate with you, but and we
Right.
see dogs who all of a sudden, if you're sad, they're looking at you. They want to comfort you because they have this sense, this feeling. And I want to think the way you're explaining it. Yeah, maybe they don't exactly read your mind, but they have this other sense of understanding. Their sensitivity is much higher. So they may
Yeah.
understand how you're feeling and they interpret it in a way that they know and you know that they know. Maybe that makes sense, maybe it doesn't, but
Well, monks can do amazing things as well. So monks who take a vow of silence, right? So
right.
like there's a lot of things that's possible, and it's a very interesting aspect of autism that is evolving. And in part, the reason why it's evolving is because that person with autism who's not able to speak is learning different ways to communicate besides just like a device that has little buttons to press. So many times these kids who might say they have telepathy are communicating through a letterboard. And so they're using gross motor skills. So this is where we can start talking about some science, right? And this is a controversial topic as well in autism. There's a lot of controversy. So letter boards and spelling to communicate. So what that looks like is there's a person, they're called a communication and regulation partner, and they have a letter board, and they're sitting next to the person with autism, and they put the letter board in front of the person, and the person's using gross motor skills. So the motion is coming from their shoulder to, poke out different letters and to spell things out. So these people with autism have access to communication that they never did before. And it's access to a different level of communication. So they have the freedom to say whatever is on their mind, which might be, how are you doing? You look sad. Or, why are you thinking about your mom who died 10 years ago? And then the person might be like, whoa, how did you know I was thinking about that? Right. But so then what the controversy comes down to is that person, that communication and regulation partner, is holding the letter boards. So back in the 90s, what was said was, it is not authentic communication of the person with autism. What it is the person holding the letter board, they're moving around like a Ouija board, and the person with autism has basically no intelligence. They're saying that there's no way that a person with autism who might be, moaning and flapping and jumping and, it might look like there's no intelligence there, but they are profoundly intelligent when they have a way to communicate. So there's been all this controversy over whether a person with non-speaking autism who might appear to be intellectually disabled, can they actually have high-level thoughts? And what the science is showing nowadays, right? We have technology. So there was a clinical trial that was done, a small number, I think it was around 13 or so kids who were fluently open and able to communicate on a board, and they did eye tracking. So it's just like, yeah, why don't we use technology to answer that question? Are they really communicating? So they would measure where the person would look, and the accuracy of their finger wasn't, 100%, right? These are kids who have motor planning difficulties, right? That's part of their diagnosis. And the research showed that they were looking at the letter that they were selecting. And so it's just like, yeah, that person with profound autism, who many people think are intellectually disabled, really just are trapped in a body that's not functioning for them, in the way that, okay, speaking is not easy, and maybe vision is difficult, so that looking at some kind of technology might be painful, right? We don't understand how everyone views things, and sensory issues and things like that. And then there are some kids who are like, I don't want to be a monkey and just press buttons, like Apple, water, like I've got more to say. So it's great that technology can now answer these questions, but there's always controversy, right? So, that research comes out and they're like, oh, kids, that's not enough, right? But, those 13 parents took a huge risk to train those kids in that communication method when everyone was saying that it's bogus, right? So it just takes time for all of this to change and evolve. But we touched upon lots of controversy.
We
Lots of
have.
controversy.
I've actually heard something similar, and I think it may have been a test for autism and telepathy type of thing. And the test that I was thinking about, they did look at the child's eyes, and they said they would every once in a while look at the tester, and
Mm-hmm.
they said inadvertently, we as the testers, we get excited, but we don't know our facial expressions. Like we do the slight, that's like, and then that person that's looking is going, oh, I must be getting warmer, I must be getting
Right. Yep. Yep.
close. So
Yeah.
but a lot of
Well, so
dangers.
eye contact is huge in an autism diagnosis. That's one of the early signs. So for
Mm.
parents who are like, should I be concerned about things? Eye contact is one of those early signs of a potential autism red flag. So for, when a child is a year or 2 years, if they're really not looking at you, that is one of the classic signs for an autism red flag, meaning, okay, start getting on the wait list for a developmental pediatrician or pediatric neurologist who can, really look at the whole child. But that eye contact is something that is definitely important.
Like I said, we've got a lot of information, a lot of controversial stuff that we're talking about, but I don't want to leave out the reason why you're here because, again, your website, you do offer a lot of helpful information. So, what can you do for parents? You do have a web page, you have a YouTube channel. Do you have books, guides, or anything like that?
Yep. So I have a book that was published in 2020. It's called The Lyons Report. And in there, I explain different aspects of functional medicine. And then it's a directory of doctors in the US who are very good at understanding what root causes are and how they can contribute to certain symptoms that we see in kids with autism. And really those doctors focus on autism because a lot of doctors, they hear autism and they're just like, oh, that's really difficult, it's hard. Like, so finding the right doctors is extremely important for parents. So when I was working with parents one-on-one, I knew, right? I mean, this is what I used to do professionally, right? Was understand who are the leaders in the field. So I knew that, and obviously also for my daughter, I needed to know who knew what and had a good team of doctors. And so I had that information. There was a wait list to work with me, and I turned it into a book because I really want parents to be able to find those good doctors and to make their own decision as to if that doctor is right for that child. So you can have a really good doctor, but maybe they don't focus on what is most meaningful for your child. So then you might be like, okay, what are my other options, right? It's important for parents to see that they have options. So I'll be releasing an updated version of that. I'm happy to say there's a lot more doctors that do focus on autism from a functional medicine standpoint, which is really important. And then I also have something called the Navigating Autism platform. So in there, we have the science that is relevant to parents so that they can have the cutting edge information to make really good decisions. And that's vital, right? You want the good information, you want the cutting edge information, and you want it organized and systematic. So we have a platform that has that information. We also have board certified health coaches that can help parents kind of navigate all of this mindset, right? There's so much we have to do, but then there's so much internally, right? We start doubting ourselves. We have stress. We have other responsibilities, other kids. We have a spouse. Like we have so much that sometimes it's really hard to be in that good mindset. So it's really important to have coaches who can help parents get unstuck when getting stuck happens. And then parents can order functional medicine tests through the platform. We teach them what the results mean, then what kind of doctor would be most appropriate. So we really try and take the science and educate the parent so they can make a decision. It's not my opinion. So you won't hear my opinion on the science or whatnot, like, oh, you should do X, Y, Z. No, I would never tell anyone that. It's like, okay, let's focus on what the science is. Let's focus on what the symptoms are for your child. And then how do we match that up so that we can resolve the symptoms? So for parents who really want education and want to know, okay, what are those 10% parent doing? How is it getting to 37%? Like what does true optimal health mean, right? Those are the parents that really do well on the Navigating Autism platform.
Speaking of functional tests and things going in that line, is part of that any blood work or anything like that?
So blood work is important, but it's not the first thing to start with because there's very few kids who are like, yes, let's do blood work. So we got to be practical, right? I am a parent. I know what it's like to take a small child, 3, 4, 5-year-old to get blood work. It's not necessarily the easiest. If you do it, you got to make sure you're doing the right stuff. You only do it like once a year or something, right? So you want to be prepared and get the right test for that. But that is along the line. So there's urine tests to do, a stool test, things along those lines that are really important. But there are some really important blood work that might need to be done. It just really depends on the child.
And you kind of mentioned like gut health, nutrition, and stuff like that early on. Do we know, does that have a big role in helping the child long term?
Yes, most definitely. Oh my goodness, diet is hugely important. And what a lot of times parents don't understand is diet and diet preferences can sometimes be governed by different gut infections.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really important. Some parents make diet changes and it just feels really hard. So, like sugar, sometimes there are different gut infections that cause cravings for carbohydrates, some specifically sugars, right? So, if you're trying to say, okay, I'm going to just cut out the sugar because I notice when my kid eats sugar, they do XYZ, right? And we need to stop that. And they might cut the sugar, but then if the child has sugar again, the behaviors come right back. So for a parent, that feels really defeating. Like, oh my gosh, they can't have sugar for the rest of their life. And it's like, no, you're only getting part of the story. So you're seeing the impact of sugar on your child, right? You're seeing these behaviors. You can also then as a parent say, okay, it's good to know that that's actually not my child, right? Who's doing those bad behaviors, doing those things. It's the impact, the influence of the sugar. And so then usually when parents see that, then they could go a little step further and say, all right, what health issues could really make someone susceptible to that? And then you can do different testing, and then you find a gut infection. You say, oh, okay, so now what do we do? Let's resolve that gut infection. Okay, so we'll resolve the gut infection and we'll make sure, this from the diet is eliminated. And then you go one step further and you say, all right, so then how can we populate the gut with more beneficial bacteria so these infections can't take hold, right? So it becomes a whole big picture rather than trying to just do one thing and think that it's going to resolve everything. Autism is complex and there's so many things interwoven, but it's not impossible.
Well, that makes me think of an entirely different topic and everything, because over the years, our nutritional values have changed and what's available to us has changed. And then we've become so used to the want it now, fast food, high fructose is in everything.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, diet plays a large role, and it's different for each child, right? So that's why I
mm-hmm.
can't say for every child with autism, go low sugar, because it's not meaningful for every child. If a child doesn't have that particular gut infection, right, you might not see much change. They might not even be eating a lot of sugar to begin with, right? This is when parents are like, oh, well, my kid's a picky eater, but they don't eat sugar, right? So then what do? If you have that idea that you do the same thing for everyone on the autism spectrum, then that person feels left out, like, oh, well, somehow it doesn't apply to us. And it's just because the chemistry and biology of everyone is different. So yeah, that doesn't apply to you, but then let's figure out what is actually meaningful for your child.
Since I have a wide band of audience and listenership, I know somebody out there, a parent, is thinking, I think I'm going to feed my child a tablespoon of sugar, see what that does. Well, that didn't do anything. They're up to a cup of sugar. That triggered something. I know his limit, but don't do that.
Yeah, I wouldn't, if they're not craving sugar, I wouldn't start pouring sugar down their throat to see what would happen, right? Right. If they don't have any infection, you might not see anything happen. And so the converse is true, right? So let's say a parent who's like, okay, my child I'm hearing about, let's just say one intervention, like an herbal. Let's just say, oil of oregano, right? Like I'm hearing about that. I'm just going to try it and give it to my child, right? If they don't have what oil of oregano targets, you do it and you're like, nothing changed, right? But you wasted time, you wasted money, you probably wasted hope because there wasn't specificity. So doing things like, oh, well, let's just try and see, that's where parents end up wasting so much time and hope. Like hope is so much more valuable than, frankly, the money we spend on a lot of these different things, because we only have so much hope. And you do a few things that maybe weren't based in logic, maybe weren't based in, a lab test where you had scientific reason as to why you were doing something, then just hope fades and it just can really change the overall outcome of your child if you do things only from hope. Like, oh, let me just try this and hope for the best, like that kind of thing. That's not a good approach. So definitely, if anyone who's listening and starting to think like, oh, let me start tinkering, let's not tinker with that. Tinker with, lab tests and things like that where you have concrete information.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because with hope, like I said, hope is so much larger than what it is. Hope gives all of us that happiness. I don't know what word to use, but hope gives us happiness because we're shooting for something and we're happy to get there. But then if you trial and error too many times, what happens to that hope? That hope turns into depression. It turns into non-hope, and it's not. You're doing yourself a disservice along with the child or the person with autism because you become frustrated and
Yeah.
you've lost hope, and then
Yeah.
where
And
are you,
and
right?
again, it's like someone with autism does not deserve substandard healthcare.
Hmm.
So again, what therapeutic area do doctors just start saying, okay, well, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this, like without any basis? You don't. Like that's not how medicine is practiced, with just this blind hope. So it's important for autism to have that same standard where it's like, okay, no, let's use science. And when you have the science, your hope can get stronger and bigger because now you have something to base it in. And it's not this like nebulous, we're just gonna create some hope and try something. When you have that basis, it's more focused. So then your hope can grow, right? Because you have some type of science, you have the determination, and your hope helps you take action, and then you see a change, and then you're like, whoa, okay, all right. And you're going in a completely different direction in a different way, grounded in information rather than just, I don't know, just nebulousness.
So can I put you on the spot, but I'm going to say that
Sure.
I'm going to give you an out by saying,
Okay.
well, I'm not a professional in that area, so I don't really want to talk about it or however you
Okay.
want to word it. So my question would be, so what are your thoughts on that flipping of the food pyramid now?
Well, flipping of the food pyramid. So diet is something that I think is really important to talk about. So
Hmm.
flipping of the pyramid, is it
You
100%
know,
correct?
when we were having more grains and now they're saying less grains and more the proteins and all that
More
kind
the
of stuff.
protein. Yeah, well, so there's different research that shows quality breakfast, meaning protein in the morning, has a better outcome for the day, right? So switching that, I think, is beneficial, but I wouldn't say for everyone. I can say growing up, I was not allowed to eat any sugary food or cereal or anything like that on a school day because my dad, who is a scientist, mathematician, he just forbade it because he's like, that's not quality fuel for your brain. So, I mean, from a logic standpoint, does protein-based breakfast make more sense? Yeah, we all know, and we take the time to have eggs or sausage or bacon, or, like taking Greek yogurt and putting in protein powder. We know how we are based upon what we put in our bodies for the fuel. So food pyramid changes, I think, are important, but I don't think it's important for everyone. But I think having the conversation about diet is super important. I don't think we were going in a really good direction overall, a decade or so ago, when there was just so much junk everywhere. I mean, you have Starbucks now who has protein coffee. I haven't tried it yet, but like this is such a topic of like how do we still be healthy but still with that convenience. And so I think as
Yes.
companies see that we want to eat healthier and they give us different products, I think that's a step in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we used to hear, years ago, ages ago, you are what you eat,
Yeah,
though.
it's
And then
true.
I don't
It's
hear
very
people saying
true.
that much anymore. And I think again, there are fats that are important and proteins for our brain. It needs that for fuel,
Yeah.
right? Not just our body for physical strength, but your brain needs it as well.
For developing kids, yes. So, omega-3s is something that's really important, and research has shown it's important in autism for a variety of different reasons, right? So, omega-3s, you're going to decrease your overall inflammation, and your brain, a developing child, right, it's just consuming all of those healthy fats. So, it definitely is important for kids to eat healthy fats, and having a breakfast that is based with those fats is great. And then also put in a little vitamin D. Right? So, you take your vitamin D with a lot of fat in the morning, you're starting off the day pretty good.
You'll be a genius mathematician, or you'll be have a PhD in something.
Yep.
Now I know where you got the brains. Maybe from both your parents.
Yeah, yeah, my mom has her MBA, so she gave us more the business side, but
See, there's a whole other thing right there is the topic that, man, I would love to find somebody to talk about is your environment and growing up. I think it has a lot to do with a lot of this as well. I don't know if it could go as far as saying it'll have anything to do with autism, but I think an environment plays an important role.
yeah, it
Perhaps even
definitely
in
does.
the realm of autism, your environment, if you're in a better environment, is good. But
Well, I have to say, in the beginning of my journey with autism, I blamed myself and really analyzed my environment and said, okay, did I somehow cause this? Right. So, I
mm,
mean, and I think that's many parents do that where they look around and be like, okay, how is this my fault? So I definitely, I definitely looked at the environment of like, okay, what did I do? And, what is my fault? And yeah. So environment definitely is important, but for any
it's not a root
parent,
cause of autism.
I would, yeah. I mean, I don't think any parent purposely put their child in an environment, right? Some kids are exposed to heavy metals that cause
Mm,
different symptoms, and but no parent is doing it purposefully. So I have to say, when a parent understands, like, oh, I wasn't giving my child organic food, or there was some heavy metal issue, or pollution. There's so many environment related issues that then parents can really start to blame themselves. So if
you're like
environment,
bringing up so much stuff because again, we're talking about the environment, the things your parents go, oh, did I do something wrong? I'll go, well, we never knew about baby powder,
very
which is
true.
bad. And then also you talk about the heavy metals, and we're not talking about a rock and roll band, but you take a look at the ingredients on the lotion that you're putting on your body. What do
Yeah.
our skin, is it the right word, permeable? Or it's got
Yes.
pores and
Permeable.
it'll
Yep.
soak right in. So you could go, oh, I'm putting poison in me by rubbing that. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, see, there's a whole lot of
Yep. But no parent who is searching for information about autism had ever done, okay, I know this is terrible for my kid. Let me just smear it on, right? So parent needs to have a little grace with themselves and be like, okay, I didn't do anything purposely. Now that I know differently, I wasn't eating organic when I was pregnant. I didn't even know all the things about food the way I do now, and grass-fed, grass-finished, and I mean, I'm an entirely different person now than before, but definitely not blaming myself because I just didn't know better.
wait, Teresa, there is Munchausen syndrome. What's the full thing? Munchausen by proxy? I don't know, but
Yeah.
or people are going to make their parents or somebody's going to make sure that that person stays sick. But I'm saying that jokingly, but like you said, parents don't do that and people don't, that's not a normal thing.
No, no, no. Anyone listening to this podcast probably tuned in because they wanted to know information about autism. So that's a loving parent. So
Yes.
they didn't knowingly cause their child's autism.
And that's a good point to put out too. It's not your fault, meaning if you're the parent and you have an autistic child, it's not your fault.
Yeah. That's it. That is not the easiest thing. You can say it and I can say it, but I think it took me a really long time to let myself off the hook. I even did different functional medicine tests on myself to be like, wait, did the issue come from me? Like what? So it's easy to say, but sometimes hard to actually do and mean.
So before we close out, I want to end with that because I think it's every bit as important as making sure that the parent knows how to deal with, how to help the autistic child, but we also need to learn how to help ourselves and don't blame ourselves. How did you manage to get through that? And I don't want to use the word get over it because maybe some people get through it, but they are not over it. So how did you get through it?
Getting through it, I think, is the right way to think about it. So, I mean, I had all those emotions when my daughter was diagnosed. I was angry, I was depressed, I was scared, just all of that. And I let myself feel it before trying to take too much action, just because I really couldn't even think straight. Just everything in our life just went upside down with that autism diagnosis. I mean, I meditate. I've been meditating for over like 2 decades easily. So lots of journaling, a lot of meditating, lots of talking. I started therapy for the first time when my daughter was diagnosed, right? Where it was like, okay, I just need some place to let out all these thoughts. And people do that differently. They might have different friends and whatnot. So I think it's important for parents to understand that it's okay to have all those emotions. And it doesn't mean that you don't love your child. A lot of times it gets twisted somehow where if you're scared and you get worried about their future, that then somehow you're not fully loving that person with autism. And it's not the case. So it's just important to feel those feelings and not try to suppress them because they'll just come up. I probably tried once or twice. It's probably why I can say with pretty certainty when you take those emotions and be like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. It didn't really go anywhere. The body keeps the score. That's something that I have learned quite a bit about. And the sense of trauma, this is another part of research with autism that's just starting to come out, is that there's an increase in the parent getting a PTSD diagnosis if their child has autism and emotional dysregulation. The increased risk is about 20 to 30%. So it is a very stressful situation. So if parents are feeling overwhelmed, it's really important for them to reach out and figure out, okay, how can I kind of get as close back to center as possible so then I can make good decisions for my child. And that happens in a variety of different ways, but it's totally okay to be upset and mad and angry and kind of think like, okay, I got a handle on it. And then you somehow get mad again. So it's okay to just be aware of those feelings. And then people who are aware of those feelings are usually pretty good at not having it spill over into some of their other relationships. And so I know there were times where I was frustrated and annoyed, and my daughter's doing better and she's coming to me to interact. And, I'm like a grouch or something, and I would see like the disappointment in her eyes. And I'm like, oh, I can never let that happen again. I did all this work so that my daughter and I had this like closeness and this connection, and I need to work on myself. So I think it's a evolution. So you have these different emotions, but then different things get reflected back on you and you see a spotlight of, oh, okay, yeah, that needs some work, right? But you give love to yourself rather than criticism. And that's what helps evolve that part.
So much out there for both parents and the child. Not just say child right now, but Theresa, this has been very informative and I think very useful for a lot of people out there. And so make sure you go to Navigating Autism, and we have it AWETISM. So, and Theresa, can you remind us again your YouTube channel name?
Sure. It's Navigating Autism, AWETISM, with Theresa Lyons. And I have 10 years of scientific videos, so feel free to jump on over to YouTube, and there's lots of science to learn.
Thank you. That's great. Again, Theresa, thank you very much. This has been very insightful and very educational.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.